So welcome to our new format for the podcast based on some feedback that you guys have given us, and thank you very much for all that feedback. We are going to try this new format for a little while. Everyone said that they were struggling to see the whiteboard and they were hoping to have a few more visual resources to follow along with, so I hope this works out for all of you. If it doesn't, please let us know. If it does and you love it, let me know that too. We want to be able to provide the most bang for your buck, even if it is free resources, when it comes to the ITO Doctor podcasts. So let's get started. Today, as we said, we were talking about how DISC can help you to become a better trainer. And for those of you that don't know what DISC is, basically what we're going to be looking at with this podcast is we're going to be looking at a 4-quadrant system which focuses on behavioral profiles to help you how to understand and better adapt to people's behaviors, and through increased awareness of students and other people's behaviors and tendencies, you can better structure training and assessment materials and more. This is actually going to be a double podcast. So in the first half this week, we're going to be talking about understanding DISC, how to identify DISC profiles and how to speak to them, and then next week we're going to be looking at how we then use DISC to better structure training assessment materials, courses, and more. So what is DISC? It's been long used. The first thing that everyone needs to understand about it, this is not about a personality test. This is not a personality profile. With DISC, it's not saying you are this or you are that. What it talks about is the way that people respond, their behavior in various situations. So, for example, how you respond to challenges, how you go about influencing others, pace, how you respond to, rules, regulations, procedures, that sort of thing. Okay, so as we said, DISC is what's known as one of the 4-quadrant profiles. So there's a range of different theories out there, and generally most of them can be directed or broken down into 4 separate kind of regions. What we've got, for those of you that are able to look at it, if you imagine DISC as a circle cut into 4 quadrants, you've got the top, you've got D on the left-hand side, I on the right, C is on the bottom left, and then S is on the bottom right. So if we take the top versus the bottom, so the top is the D and the I, and the bottom is the C and the S. What we look at there is we look at people who have more outgoing personalities, so people who are more likely to be extroverts versus people who are more reserved and are more likely to behave with more introverted behaviors. So that's your D's and your I's are your more outgoing types. Your C's and S's are more likely to behave in a more reserved fashion. We then look at those who are either more task-oriented or more people-oriented. So if, again, you've cut the circle along the top, now we're going to cut it down the middle and separate it into left and right-hand sides. Those on the left, the D's and the C's, are going to be more task or results-oriented. And those who are the I's and S's on the right-hand side, they are going to be more people-oriented, okay? And their language is going to quite often reflect that. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail coming up. So for those of you that are just listening, you've got D, top left, I, top right, C, bottom left, S, bottom right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about just the broad categories of behavior. The D in DISC is the one that we'll start off with, and that generally stands for dominance. So people who are considered as high Ds, their behaviors tend to be very direct. They are results-oriented, firm, strong-willed, and forceful. Okay, your I's stand for the influencers group, and they are generally described as people who are outgoing, enthusiastic, optimistic, high-spirited, lively. That's, very talkative, happy-go-lucky sort of people. Your S is for steadiness. And steadiness is about being even-tempered. They're very accommodating, patient, humble, tactful. Everybody gets along well with an S. Your C's are those who are very conscientious. They are analytical, reserved, precise, private, and systematic. So going into these in a little bit more detail, When you are dealing with Ds, or if you're going to be learning about Ds, you're more likely to find Ds the higher up you go in a corporate organization. So generally what you're looking at with your Ds is you're looking at people who are training managers, executives. The higher up you go through the corporate sphere, the more likely you are to find more high D type personalities. Described as demanding, forceful, egocentric, strong-willed, driven, determined, ambitious, pioneering. There's, very kind of strong, lots of strong leadership skills when we talk about Ds. One of the things that's important as we go through this as well is to remember that no one profile is better than the other. So it's not like it's best if you're, Ds are better than Is, or S's are better than C's, or anything along those lines. Every one of the DISC profiles has both positive and negative attributes which are attached to them. And most people will find that, the majority of them will apply in one area, but, some of them may not as well. So the strengths for people who are Ds, obviously, as we said before, these are quite often leaders in organizations. They may be known as the problem solvers. They are not afraid to make tough decisions. They're not afraid to confront difficult issues, and very, very much focused on the mission. So if you're going to be dealing with a D, you're looking at somebody who is going to want to achieve. They're going to want to win. Very, very much motivated by winning competition success. They will generally almost always accept a challenge, and they very much value competency, action, results, personal freedom, conquering challenges, things like that. Okay, they're generally very independent people. The other side of that, sometimes their actions can be interpreted as intimidating because they're very direct. They can be considered insensitive, impatient, intolerant, and sometimes unapproachable. Your eyes, so again, we're still sticking with people who are obviously quite confident. When we talk about eyes, where you're going to be finding your eyes are in your sales and marketing departments, acting professionals. These are the storytellers of the group, your eyes, standing for influence. They are generally described as convincing, magnetic, political, enthusiastic, persuasive, warm, demonstrating, trusting, and optimistic. The strengths in the eyes are they are always there for others, inspiring, spreads the positive attitude, and praises others. Eyes are very much driven by some similarities to D's. So, somebody with I will value their independence. They will value, winning, but they will value that more from a point of view of, popularity or authority or prestige status. Very much driven by friendships and happiness, and will often fear any loss of influence or disapproval. These are not people who like to be ignored, that sort of thing. They can be viewed in regards to kind of weaknesses as being a little bit unorganized, not following through, and not getting things completed. So generally I's are people who are very much big thinkers, really, really happy to talk about things. When it comes to getting things done and following through, that can sometimes be where they lack a little bit. So your S's. So S's is still going to be people oriented, but they're also going to be much more reserved. So when you're dealing with S's, you're going to be more likely to find them in places like human resources, community services, education support, disability support, counselors, that sort of thing. They are generally described as calm, relaxed, patient, possessive, predictable, deliberate, stable, consistent, can tend to be unemotional, and poker-faced. The strengths of the S's are very much that they are good team players, they are empathetic, they're methodical, good listeners, and easy to get along with. S's are very much driven by wanting to be recognized for personal accomplishments, but through group acceptance and helping groups, the group achieve goals and things like that. They very much like maintenance of the status quo. They can be quite resistant to change at times. They like things to stay the same. They like to be able to maintain what their environment is. They can at times, because of that, be viewed as indecisive, indirect, resistant to change, and docile. Okay, the last group that we are going to obviously be looking at then, that leaves us with the C's. So the C's in general are known as the perfectionists of the group. Where you're generally going to find them is with kind of auditors, analysts, engineers, IT area accountants. Any roles where detail is going to be a really important part of the role. They are often described as careful, cautious, exacting, neat, systematic, diplomatic, accurate, and tactful. When you're dealing with an I, you're dealing with people who are very much motivated by opportunities to gain knowledge, create really high quality work, the ability to be able to show their expertise. The strengths of the C's are that they are thorough, accurate, diplomatic, fair, and compliant. If you're looking to get the best quality of work, you're generally going to go to somebody who's a C. Because of the very, very high quality expectations and the very analytical, accurate and systematic nature of C's, they can be viewed at times as overly concerned with perfection, and because of that, a little bit aloof, fussy, overcritical and stubborn are some of the other areas where C's can be viewed as a little bit less than positive. But as we said, every personality and profile is going to have that. Okay, so how do you go about identifying each of these different profiles is the next thing that we're going to look at. And one of the best ways that I recommend to start looking at this is actually start looking at the way that they either provide instructions or through things like emails. When you're first learning how to start looking at DISC profiles and how to start reading DISC profiles and interpreting behaviors of others, email is a really nice simple way because you've actually got time to actually sit, look through it, dissect language, understand the language that people are using, more so than if you're sitting across from a person and trying to one, pay attention to what they're saying, perhaps jot that down for future tasks that need to get completed, or are undertaking an assessment on that person, and then also having to kind of put them into these categories or assess their behaviours at the same time. So if we look at the scenario, Dave has to email John to remind him about submitting a report, which has come in late for the last 2 weeks. The types of emails that you might get from a D, as we said, are going to be very, very much direct, going to get straight to the point. So an email or an instruction which is provided will sound something like this. John, your report is due tomorrow. You've been late the last 2 weeks. Get it in on time tomorrow. May be interpreted as a little bit aggressive or short if it's done in an email. If it's done in person, that tone might not come through as much, but the message will be very, very quick, direct, to the point. If you're dealing with an I, it's going to be fairly opposite to that. So when you're dealing with an I, it's going to sound something along this. Johnny, how's it going? You were great at the game this weekend. What a tackle. Don't forget your report is due tomorrow. Get it in on time or I'm going to have a talking to you. Let me know how it's looking, superstar. By the way, I went to this restaurant the other night. You have to try it. Remind me the next time we talk, Dave. Obviously, looking at just those two first styles, in some ways you're dealing with polar opposites. The language goes from being very, focused on the specific task or on directly to the message that's got to be conveyed, versus when you're dealing with your eyes, it's much, they're going to start out with it being more personal. It's going to be a small part, the actual request or the message that needed to get through is actually going to be a small part of all of the information that was provided. The language of it is going to be much more personal, and an I is much more likely to use humor or sarcasm or something along those lines to kind of diffuse the situation a little bit as well. Okay, that same message coming from an S is going to sound completely different again. So an S who has to provide this information or the instruction is going to sound something, much more like this. Hi John, how are you? Just a general reminder that your report is due tomorrow. I know you've had some trouble getting it in the last 2 weeks, so if you need some help, just let me know. I'm happy to spend some time going through it if you think that will help. Otherwise, if there's something going on, I'm here if you need to talk. Kind regards, Dave. So looking at the kind of S profile again, it's going to be focused on the person as opposed to focused on the task. It's going to be very supportive in nature. It's going to be very, kind of toned down, gentle, really kind of eases into it and provides a lot of backup and kind of feelings language, making sure that the person is going to be okay. It's about, making sure that even though you're giving an instruction to somebody and reminding them about something that they maybe haven't done appropriately, that you're not doing it in a way that's in any way, shape or form considered aggressive. Okay, the C's is the last group that obviously has to convey this message. Again, remembering that C's are going to be our very kind of perfectionist, analytical groups. An email like that is again going to move back to being more task oriented. So it'll sound something like this. John, marketing has informed me that your report was submitted late Friday afternoon instead of Thursday for the last 2 weeks. We need reports submitted by Thursday's close of business so we can review on Fridays and collate the information from Monday's weekly meetings. Please ensure that you submit your report by no later than close of business 5 p.m. on Thursdays each week. Dave. So again, when we look at that, it's very much, focusing on the details. Okay, so rather than just saying it was submitted late, it was actually submitted late Friday afternoon instead of Thursday close of business, which is when it was supposed to be. There's a logic is provided behind that as to why it needs to be provided on the Thursdays as opposed to the Friday afternoons. Okay. So that's kind of one of the first ways to start, and we will put a whole bunch of additional resources on the website if you're more interested in wanting to find out more about how to identify different DISC profiles. There'll be a whole bunch of links to different podcasts and websites and things like that you'll be able to get that from. So just really briefly, what are some of the quick ways that once we can kind of start to understand people's profiles, how we can better relate to them, how we can more effectively communicate with them. And also through understanding our, if we can recognize one of those profiles in each of us, how can we more effectively communicate and kind of reduce that very high level behaviors ourselves. And this is not about changing who you are in any way, shape or form. It's just being aware of, potential areas of strength and weakness within yourself, within others, and being able to find more effective ways of, communicating information to the, either similar or different profiles of people that we deal with. Okay, so the first one, again, we'll go back to the D's. So if you're trying to increase communication and better relate with somebody who is a cleared, high D, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to be direct, you're going to stick to the subject, try not to waffle, avoid direct confrontation where possible. As we said, D's are very much driven by, competition, that's kind of the motivation to win, that sort of thing. So direct confrontation is kind of going to be perceived as challenging, that sort of thing, and then the person who's confronting them becomes the challenge to overcome. Avoid generalizations. Focusing very much on the discussion. Refrain from repeating yourself where possible, and focus on solutions rather than the problems. So if you've got an issue that you need to deal with and you've got to deal with it with a D, rather than spending a lot of time explaining, how the problem occurred or why the problem occurred, what a D is going to be wanting to focus on is how it's going to be solved. Okay, so that's what you want to be focusing on when you're talking with a D. If you are a D and you're communicating with other profiles, then what you want to try and watch within yourself is being really patient with others. So avoid the tapping of the fingers, the checking on the watches, that sort of thing. Try and be a little bit more okay with getting into details about conversations, about things that people have done or that they need to do. Allow the other person to finish their sentence. For you D's and I's out there, that will be incredibly difficult. I speak as somebody who is has a lot of high I in them. Allow for deliberation. So give the other person opportunities to, provide their opinion, and accept that just because it's another opinion that is not yours, it's not automatically the wrong opinion. If you're dealing with I's, share your own experiences with them. Allow the I sometimes to talk about themselves. We like talking about ourselves as I's. Avoid overloading them with details. Focus on the positives. As I said, I's are people who are very much, always wanting to look on the brighter side of life, and try not to interrupt where possible. If you are an I and you are communicating with other personality types or working with them in general, some of the things to try and work on is the follow through. So if you say you are going to complete a report, make sure you complete the report. Research more about the facts, so try and be a little bit more detail oriented. Again, allowing the other person to finish their sentence. This is possibly even more difficult for the I's than it is for the D's. Speak more directly and more candidly about things. So again, it's about a little less, grandiose waffling, and a little bit more about staying on point, and also trying to stay more focused through the entire conversations. I's are notorious multitaskers. So it's being able to stay focused while the other person is speaking or while the group is speaking, to get all the way through to the end of an idea and a plan, rather than, just the excitement in the beginning. The S's. All right, so if you are working with an S, one of the things that you want to try and do, especially if you're a D or an I, is kind of bring yourself down a little bit. Be really personable, express your interest, support, gratification for them and for what they're doing. Give them time to allow for their responses, give them time to process and provide feedback. And you need to be able, again, especially if you're a D or an I, you need to give S the time to do that. So after you've finished with your sentence and you're waiting for them to provide feedback, you might need to give a gap, a slightly wider, longer gap than you would if you were talking with another D or I. Avoid confrontation and aggression wherever possible. People who are S's are not going to respond positively as if it's a challenge when they're faced with confrontation. The S profiles are more likely to just kind of walk away, that sort of thing. If you are an S and you're trying to communicate with other, communicate and work with other profile types, then trying to be more accepting of change, promoting yourself more, confronting others when your opinion is not being heard, and making quicker decisions. So again, this is focused on the feedback that other profiles might see an S as slightly more docile. So it's just about being a little bit more active in order to be able to do that. Okay, your last one is when you are dealing with your C's, and this can be one of the more difficult profiles to communicate with, especially if you're an S or an I. S's and I's working with C's can find that quite difficult. So if you're trying to communicate better with a C, again, it goes back to, similar with the D, focusing on the facts and details, replacing things like I feel with, for me, the logical conclusion is, or a similar kind of logic-based reason, as opposed to, well, I feel it's the right thing to do, or that's my gut instinct. So again, it goes away, moving away from generalizations to specifics. Be very patient. Again, similar with the S's, it's about allowing them time to consider their responses, or to analyze all of the relevant information in order to come to a decision. Praise the accuracy of tasks or the quality of work over personal attributes, and be diplomatic and logical wherever possible. If you are a C and you're communicating, working with others, try to let go of tasks and delegate. Accept that few, if any, people will achieve perfection. The C's are the person that you go to when you need to get the job done, but quite often C's are also those who will take on more and more and more, because they can do it better themselves than handing it over to somebody else. So with C's, that's quite a big challenge. Joining in social conversations and events, and limit your research and analysis time and set deadlines for that period so that you can more quickly arrive at conclusions. And again, we're going to have a lot more There's a lot more resources which will be up on our website if you want to follow these anymore. There's a couple of really good podcasts that I would recommend. Manager Tools and Career Tools in particular are two fantastic podcasts that you can find on the internet through Google Play or on iTunes. And again, we'll put links to both of those in the podcast notes as well. I hope that you guys enjoyed this week. We went a little bit over time, but as I said, I'm an I, so that's going to happen. Next week, we will look at how you use the DISC profiles to tailor your assessments and training tasks to more effectively fit those different profiles and groups. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy this week, please go on and sign up to follow us on our podcasts. Follow us on our YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn and Twitter pages. All those links can be found at the bottom of the podcast notes or on our website. Thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.